this let's chat about episode, I guess. It's not really like a consistent series I do, it's more just videos when I feel like I just want to enjoy chatting about something in particular, and in this case, as you can kind of see in the background, it's Pillars of Eternity 2, which came out from when I record this about 4 days ago, same day as Destiny 2. Now, Pillars of Eternity 2 is the sequel to the, what was it, 2015 I want to say, Pillars of Eternity. Might even be a bit before that perhaps, but Pillars of Eternity was, or is, what's called a CRPG. It was kickstarted. It's by a company called Obsidian. Yeah, it was 2015. I just checked it, and it's very much a classic kind of role-playing game, taking roots from Dungeons and Dragons, or kind of like the isometric-y style of role-playing games, which were kind of very prominent in the 90s with things like Neverwinter Nights and Planescape Torment, and are kind of beginning to make a bit of a comeback, which in my opinion is a great thing. Now, RPGs as a whole are very, very different games in the kind of modern kind of gaming landscape, I guess. You have things like, I guess, Skyrim, which are your more kind of like first-person action RPGs. You have and kind of Fallout would fall in that kind of area. You have the kind of RPGs like Diablo, which look very similar to like Pillars, but is actually more of a kind of like action RPG. You have all sorts of different games. You have things which are just kind of more text based. You have games which are, say, something like The Division, which people could class as an RPG, but it's kind of a or third-person shooter. You have something like Destiny, which people might call an RPG. Most modern games have role-play elements in them, but I feel like the term RPG is such a broad term nowadays that you never really know what you're going to get with it. Now, a lot of people might see Pillars of Eternity and be kind of quite put off, because at first glance it can seem to be quite a complicated game. Like, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of depth, but one thing I am really enjoying about it is the fact that depending on what difficulty you go on, you don't really have to have as much knowledge, shall we say, of the game mechanics as as you perhaps would do in other games. So I'm playing it on normal currently on my playthrough, and I think I'm maybe like 10 hours into the game or so, and just absolutely thoroughly loving it to pieces, and learning things as I go. So even though I'm 10 hours in, I'm still picking up bits and bobs as I go and going, oh, that's a thing, is it? Or I didn't know that I could do this or could do that. And it's absolutely fantastic. I love kind of learning those things as I go through the game, but it also doesn't hold me back in a way, and doesn't kind of make me lose out, I don't think, on the experience of it. Now, Pillars of Eternity has a real-time kind of combat element to it. It's pausable real-time, so when you're in combat, it plays out real-time. You give, I guess, commands to your party. You can see we've got 5 in our party, and there's different spells and abilities and just regular attacks and all sorts of different things which go on, and everybody has, or different classes have, a different kind of like ability meter, shall we say, and yeah. But then there are other kind of more classic RPGs, like say Divinity Original Sin, which actually have a turn-based combat system, so each character takes their turn, and then you get things like initiative, which makes them have their turn faster, or stunning people means that they may miss a turn and stuff like that. I don't really have a preference. I actually enjoy both a lot. The thing you get with Pillars is probably a little bit more of a hectic kind of combat in a way, although it's obviously pausable. You have to think about what everyone's doing. Of course, you can pause and give a command and then do that, but I kind of like the fact that it's quite hectic and you've got to keep an eye on what everybody's doing, and if you don't, then one of your party members could get knocked out. In the kind of blink of an eye, and that can happen. And I like Divinity's kind of turn-based methods because you can set up things like putting down oil and then casting a fire spell to burn somebody and stuff like that, and there's a kind of nice element there, but that feels a lot more akin to something, say, like XCOM or something like that, where you're like, oh, what's my opponent gonna do, and you can't react as much in real time as you can in something like Pillars. So I enjoy both. My kind of like where I kind of grew up and fell in love with like RPG games was definitely kind of like during the 90s. I was more of a PC gamer, but in honesty, the kind of games like like the games like Planescape Torment and Neverwinter Nights kind of passed me by a little bit. I don't really know why. I guess maybe at that time they seemed a little bit kind of like complicated, I guess, which I think is what a lot of people probably think. But as I kind of like grew up a bit and kind of picked up kind of different games, I think really kind of where my experience started was in the Ultima series of games. I think specifically Ultima 7 and Ultima 8, although Ultima 8 was a little bit different. And then I feel like we had this kind of like drought. In other words, this kind of game went out of fashion for a while. Obsidian, who made this game, they made things like KOTOR, which is a slightly different kind of game from perspective point of view and the things you do in it, although it still had the kind of amazing story that Obsidian is known for. You had the Fallout New Vegas, which Obsidian made, again based very much on the Fallout 3 engine, and that kind of first person RPG. Again, amazing story, but I think their kind of like comeback with Pillars of Eternity and then Tyranny kind of started to bring back into fashion this style of game, and certainly Larian Studios with Divinity Original Sin 1 and then more recently Divinity Original Sin 2, both excellent games by the way and well worth your time. I think has kind of made it so that this this style of RPG is now very much kind of like beginning to be viable again, I guess, for people, in so much as every game has to be commercially viable, and I think people are that there is a market now for these games. And certainly what's even more amazing is the fact that we're now seeing things like Divinity come out on PlayStation. Both the games are well, the first one is out on PlayStation, but Original Sin 2 is coming to PlayStation 4. And allowing console gamers to experience this kind of game. I think ultimately the PC is probably the better experience for it, the keyboard and mouse. But having played Divinity Original Sin 1 on PlayStation 4, I can say that it's a really good experience still, and well worth your time again with what you do. Speaking more about Pillars and my kind of thoughts on that in this game in particular, as I guess this is the most recent one that's come out, I would say that from a graphical point of view, it's perhaps not as good looking as Divinity Original Sin 2. I felt like that was a really amazing looking game, but it looks good still. I like the effects they have, the lighting and that kind of thing, and certainly doesn't take away, I think, from the experience in any way, shape or form. The story so far is really, really good. I'm not going to spoil anything for anybody who's thinking of picking it up, but I think most people know that it has a kind of like Caribbean pirate kind of flavour to it. Deadfire, which is the kind of like subtitle of the game, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, is the name of the islands that the game is kind of based around, and it has a very, I don't think I'd spoiling anything by saying that there is ship combat in the game, and you get your own ship and you can upgrade it and do all that sort of stuff. I think that happens pretty early on in the game, so I don't think that's really a spoiler. The whole game world is kind of based around gods. I mean, the funny thing I always think is like most RPG games are kind of based around gods being dicks. Divinity Original Sin kind of had that in a way, I guess, and Pillars does. And then when you think of like other RPGs, even Skyrim, most Elder Scroll games, it usually involves one of the Daedric gods kind of like scheming or trying to take over, and Divinity does have a slightly different story with that. Again, not wanting to spoil that, but Pillars is kind of very much, again, not spoiling anything, but you're going after a rogue god, as it were, and it picks up as the same character from the first one, so you obviously get to choose your character, but if you have a save you can import that, and the decisions you made in the first game will affect everything you do. Well, not everything, but a lot of things that happen in the second one, even to the point of if certain characters died in the first one, they just won't appear in this one. So that's really, really cool. I love it when you have that kind of experience which pulls over. We saw that in something like the Witcher series, Mass Effect as well. Ultimately, I think people are sometimes a little bit weary of that because their expectation that their game is going to be completely different to somebody else's, because they played the previous game, is, I think, sometimes a little bit overblown. Like, generally with these games you have multiple endings, obviously, but those endings are available even if you haven't played the first game, shall we say, because you can choose your backstory and stuff like that. One of my favourite ways that they did that was actually in the Mass Effect trilogy, where there was like a comic, interactive comic that you could kind of like go through to kind of make the decisions. That was always very cool. And I remember as well there was a website for Dragon Age Inquisition which allowed you to make choices through the first two games which would then affect certain quests and missions and stuff in Inquisition, and I really like that. That's always a very cool kind of mechanic. I will say, actually, just thinking about it now, with Dragon's Age, I think I more was kind of moved towards the kind of Dragon Age series. I've spoken about it before, but with Dragon Age Origins, I adore that game, by the way. And I think I've told this story before, but I brought that game completely on chance. I was a little bit kind of like, at the time, I think I was a little bit, I think I'd finished Skyrim, so I got it late. I'm pretty sure it came out before Skyrim. And I think I saw it on Amazon, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting, but I had literally never heard of it. I don't think I was as into games as I am now at the time. You know how things happen, ebb and flow, life changes, etc, etc. Yeah, it actually came out in 2009, Dragon Age, so I came to it quite late, and I saw it and I was like, oh, this looks interesting, and I saw some reviews for it and they were pretty good. They were kind of like 80s or 90s, and picked it up and absolutely fell in love with it. Like, it is an amazing game, and you know, slightly different, I guess, to this style of game, but certainly shares a lot of, I'd say it's a kind of like a streamlined version of something like Pillars. Because what I do like about Pillars and Divinity is this kind of like depth that you do have, you know, the amount of like abilities you have, the crafting you can do, you know, the status effects, the things your characters are doing, leveling up and thinking about what skills you're going to take, and having kind of like a view to the kind of evolution that your character's going to take. And you know, you level up each character in your party individually, so you know, it can take a while. This is not the sort of game for somebody who wants to, I guess, you know, dip in for 30 minutes, you know, every now and then. It's a very, very long game. You know, these games always are generally, you know, 70 plus hours long at least, usually more if you're going to do everything and have multiple playthrough opportunities with multiple different decisions and outcomes, so you get your money's worth. And it's worth noting, actually, on that point, that this game was about £32, I think, and the same with Divinity Original Sin 2, so they're not even charging the kind of, you know, traditional full price for a video game, which I think is bonkers, because the amount of quality you get in these games is quite incredible. I think some people have complained about bugs in Pillars 2, but I have not come across any. I think I had one minor one, which was like a sound bug in some combat, but like literally nothing else, basically. Yeah, so no real kind of like issues there from me, I guess, on that front. Pillars does like some interesting things, because obviously you have this kind of, as you see, the kind of classic mode. You then have like this kind of storybook style as well, which we might see coming up, where you kind of like make some choices. Think of it as like the kind of classic kind of like, you remember the like Steve Jackson kind of like books, kind of a bit like that, which you kind of like make decisions and then you can succeed or fail, and you know, have that sort of thing happen. And then obviously there's the kind of like ship combat, which you have where you actually like sail your ship around, not in a kind of like Black Flag style. You know, it's fairly kind of basic, but it's actually pretty interesting. And I have a love of all kind of like nautical things like that, and when I see the fact that I can like buy new ships and like buy new cannons and think about that kind of like stuff, then I'm like, ooh, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty exciting for me. I'm a bit of a loser like that, I guess. But yeah, I guess overall I'm really enjoying Pillars. The character character kind of creation, the choices you have, and the different classes are all very interesting. My playthrough, I'm playing through as just a rogue, but it's got a subclass, so each class then has a subclass you can choose, and you can even have like a dual classes, which can be pretty strong early on, but late on they miss out on some of the stuff that just concentrating on a single class gets you. But it kind of shows the depth that they have in this game. It's really incredible. Yeah, a rogue trickster allows the rogue to get some like illusion spells as well as being the kind of like DPS damage, and that allows them a bit more survivability, I guess. I will say that the video you watch was fairly early on, and I've learnt a lot more about the game now, as I've said, and I'm a little bit noobish in a lot of these fights, so you will have to kind of like, forgive me of that if you are a very hardcore player. I've learnt a lot kind of playing through. I played Pillars 1, but I didn't complete it. But I feel like I really am going to complete Pillars 2, because there just feels like there's, I don't know, I think the thing with Pillars 1 was the setting was good, but I think we'd seen it a lot before, so it had the kind of classic like looks like kind of like English countryside style setting, crumbling ruins, that type of thing, and the kind of Caribbean flavour that I'm getting with Pillars 2 is really interesting and actually keeping me interested. I like the kind of dungeon delving. There's a good balance of that from what I've played so far, with the kind of like more kind of walking around the towns, chatting to people kind of thing, as well as the whole sail your ship around and do that type of thing. So I think it's got a really nice balance of like different things to do without just kind of focusing on one thing. I also played Tyranny, which again is by the same company. I liked what Tyranny did with the story. I never actually played too much into it, and again I really want to, but these games are so time consuming. But Tyranny kind of like had a really interesting story where basically the bad guys had won and you are one of them. And you kind of take it from there. So if you ever wanted to play a game where you are a pretty nasty piece of work, then Tyranny is the one for you. And Divinity Original Sin 2 was probably one of my favourite games of 2017. Just outright, just a magnificent game. So yeah, I think I look at games like this and I look at the modern day kind of gaming market, and I think to myself, like, there's a lot of people who I think kind of miss out on this style of game because maybe they have a preconception of what it's about, or what it is, or maybe they're like, oh, it's too in-depth to learn and stuff like that. I mean, literally you can learn so much by watching just a 10-minute video on YouTube that people have done, and you will literally pretty much learn the basic mechanics of the game and what you're doing. And as I said, Obsidian are so good at crafting a story. The story is very interesting so far, and obviously all the side quests and the different characters. One of the amazing things about Pillars 2 is that the voice acting in it is incredible. One of the criticisms I think sometimes of these games is that people call them like RPGs for people who like reading, and there is a little bit, but I wouldn't say there's any more than something like Skyrim or something like that, in so much as you have to read your responses. There is some narration going on, but it's not like 100%, but every single person talking, NPC, or party member, is fully voiced, and voiced really well. If anybody watches the Critical Role Dungeons and Dragons kind of like team, which is based on some of the best voice actors in the business, people like Matthew Mercer, Laura Bailey, Ashley Johnson, all 10 of them are in the game, Like, that was a big thing they had, even to the point where the characters they play in that are kind of like, you can have them as your kind of like party if you wish. You know, I've chosen to go with the people who are actually in the game. Some of them are from the first ones, which I remember. Eda, Aloth, people like that. I don't know if that's spoilers, but you would have seen their picture already, so I guess not. And obviously there are new characters as well, which are really interesting. And yeah, so the voice acting is really, really good, and there's a lot more kind of chatter between your party as you go through, which is really interesting. And your party can have relationships with each other, in terms of whether they get on and stuff like that. There is like romance options, I think Obsidian said, but it's not kind of like, oh, you can romance every single person, you do it this way. It's more of an organic thing, depending on, you know, what goes on and stuff like that. So it's interesting, I think. Where these games perhaps lack in this kind of graphical kind of fidelity that you might get in, you know, something like, say, Fallout 4, or dare I say Skyrim with mods. You know, more than makes up for in game depth, the story, and just the whole world. You know, the game world itself is fascinating. It's you know, learning things. I love what they do in this. There might be an example you pick up at some point in this video where when there's dialogue with, you know, when you're talking to somebody, it has highlighted words. When you hover over that word, it explains what that word is about. So if there's like a god they mention, you can hover over it and they'll tell you about that god, you know, just a little kind of paragraph on it. If there's like a regional like greeting or something like that, it will tell you what that is. Or if there's like, if something is affected by a playthrough of Pillars of Eternity 1, it'll show a little symbol and tell you, yeah, this was affected by your playthrough of Pillars of Eternity 1. It's just a really cool feature. I really, really like it. And it has a really good kind of line between this kind of like quite dark, grim kind of game, you know, with a serious tone, and some really good light-hearted moments, mostly provided by your kind of like party themselves. Eder is kind of a favourite, I guess, from the first game, and he's back with his kind of like very dry sarcasm, or dry wit, I guess, and dark humour from there. But there's some other new ones as well who are very funny. I like them a lot. You know, Zotti is like very positive all the time. You know, it's kind of nice. Reminds me a little bit of Meryl from like Dragon Age 2, actually, in that way. But yeah, it's nice to have that kind of like different party, and that kind of like interspersing of humour every now and then, interesting situations, from what could just be a you know, otherwise a very grim game, I guess. Similar to that, something like Witcher 3, I guess, where you know, the whole kind of world that you're in, you know, this kind of like civil war that's going on is kind of horrible, and you know, people are suffering everywhere, but you know, Geralt can still find a little bit of humour or a little bit of dry wit every now and then, you know, or someone like Dandelion can, or you know, just the characters you meet, and that's nice. I think I really like that style that they have. So I guess overall, you know, one of the reasons I kind of wanted to do this video was to make people aware of this game, and maybe you saw it and you're a bit on the fence about it. I do recommend it if you like games like you know, RPG games and role-playing games and that kind of character building. Then you know, it's recommended. You know, if you do feel perhaps like there is a bit much going on, there is like an easy mode, you know, a story mode, which, you know, you don't really have to worry too much about some of the deeper mechanics of the game, or just to learn the game, I guess, and go through. But yeah, you know, in a world where people often accuse video games of dumbing down, you know, to the lowest common denominator, like for example, just putting 100 people in a big field and saying, hey, everyone shoot each other until the last person standing. That's my once per video pop at Fortnite. But yeah, where there is a case of that happening, or, you know, people often accuse things like Skyrim of dumbing down and stuff like that, or you know, Mass Effect is a kind of classic one. The very first Mass Effect was a lot more RPG than other ones were, but even that was kind of like light RPG, I guess. You know, it's good to see these games come out where there is, you know, a thought process having to be taken in, because it's so much more rewarding, I think, when you actually pull something off. There's a boss fight, which I make sure I put in actually, where I literally was, you know, my character was the last man standing. You know, if your party all get knocked out, then, you know, you have to reload basically, but they all recover afterwards. They just have injuries and stuff like that, and which you can rest and take away. But yeah, I went up against this boss, you probably see it, and it was tough. It was a tough fight, and again, I wasn't very good with it, and my character was literally like the last man standing, and I managed to do it, and that was a very rewarding moment. I did think, like, if I did this again, I could probably beat him quite easily, knowing what I know now. But there is that thing of like, just kind of like winging it through on the first time and managing to do that, you know, without really knowing what the weaknesses of the person or the boss that you're fighting is, or anything like that, really. So yeah, it's a really good game. I thoroughly recommend it. As I said, I wanted to kind of do this video to just chat about CRPGs and Pillars of Eternity as a whole, and yeah, I kind of feel like I'd love to do a playthrough of it, but I think I started a playthrough of Divinity, and I think what I learned from that was that the problem with these games are, from a let's play point of view, is there's a lot of like downtime. There's a lot of like you know, sifting through your stuff and kind of doing that, and, you know, looking at classes and abilities and respecking and stuff like that, and looking at weapons, and it doesn't always go down well in a kind of like let's play environment. And also a story, you know, you couldn't just be like, oh, I missed a couple of episodes, let's jump back in, where are we? Because you probably wouldn't have a clue what's going on. You know, it's kind of simple in Skyrim, I think, sometimes, because you kind of focus on one quest at a time. You kind of like, you get that quest and then you go and do that thing. And Pillars has got like multiple quests going on at the same time. I know you can do that in Skyrim, but like to the point whereby like it just feels a lot more kind of like things change a lot more rapidly than they would. You're going to completely different places, you know, whereas in Skyrim it's often like, oh, you know, you walk from one place to another, where you're kind of like you know, fast travel or whatever. But generally it's, you know, like a dungeon is a dungeon. You know where you're going, and it's a bit more about, I guess, the gameplay as well, and you can kind of pick things up. But I think in Pillars it's like really tough, and if you're then talking about having like a, you know, 100 episode series on it, that's pretty tough for people to get involved in. As much as like I would love to do it, I'm sure there are some people out there who would love to do it. What Divinity kind of taught me was that there is a kind of hardcore community for that, and there are some very successful streamers and content creators doing games like this, but I think you have to have that right sort of audience, and in the kind of like style that I do my videos and things like that, it's not really work out quite so well. So I'm very content to just play it in my spare time and go through and just thoroughly enjoy it as a game, and kind of blunder my way through. Yeah, I really want to get back, and it's kind of making me think I want to play through the first one, but I kind of know what happens in the first one, and then I'm like, would, you know, the problems surrounding kind of like you know, quality of life stuff that they've updated in this one, would that just annoy me to the point? So I probably won't ever go back to the first one, but I could see myself having a second playthrough of this game, bizarrely. You know, 10 hours in, you're often like, oh, if I'd have known that, you know, back then, which is cool. I like that anyway. And because there's so many different classes, there's so many different and races as well, which kind of like will affect things that, you know, are kind of like I'm looking forward almost to having that. So yeah, I guess it's just a short little video to chat about that. I say short, it's like 35 minutes long because I apparently don't know the meaning of the word short, but there you go, guys. Pillars of Eternity 2, I recommend it. Divinity Original Sin 2, I recommend it. Plus the first ones in the series, I recommend as well. Probably pretty cheap right now. If you've got a PlayStation or you're a console gamer, I recommend Divinity, and Divinity Original Sin 2 is coming out at some point this year, I believe. And yeah, that's that. You know, that should be on your list of exciting games to play, I think, because that is a real masterpiece. And so far, Pillars 2 as well. So thank you for watching, as always, and I will see you guys soon. Bye bye.